First of all, just a reminder, if it's a little dusty and dirty, we are under construction, and it's been a very hard week to keep up with the dust. And they're doing sheetrock and plastering, and it's all over the place. So please bear with us as we are under construction. Thank you. Phil? With that, let us listen now. We're getting it different to the introit, to the choir, and the call to worship as we begin to worship the Lord today. Enter into worship carefully, for this is the house of God. The Son of God comes to you with blessings in hand. Christ comes to release us from prison, to free us from darkness, and to restore us to hope. He will bind you to your neighbor in a bond of love. Be careful in this place, lest your spirit miss God's blessing. Come and worship. Come with the spirit of a child. Let us begin with the singing of our opening hymn, number 39.
Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. What do you want me to do? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Before I go any further, I need to make a confession. I am solely responsible for the choosing of that first hymn. It reads so well, but it doesn't sing all that great, does it? I apologize. There's a wonderful story about the King and the Queen of Sweden who were attending the 1980 Olympics at Lake Placid in New York. And they had tickets for a hockey game which the Swedish team was going to play. But they were stopped at the gate by the ticket taker and told that the tickets they were actually holding were for a game another day. The king, realizing that he had the wrong tickets and that the right tickets were in his car, asked if he could be allowed in without the correct tickets. Could you make an exception, please? You see, I am the King of Sweden. The ticket taker said, sure you are, and I suppose this is the Queen. Well, when the King and the Queen of Sweden went back to their car to get the correct tickets, they found that you need to pay attention in America where you park, because their car had been towed. I guess being the King and the Queen of Sweden comes with less perks than maybe the President or the Queen of England. I don't know. But how about you? Are you at the place you would like to be at this point in your life? We spend our whole life pursuing dreams and goals. We aim to go higher, to become greater. We like to think as we get older we get more perks. It's the mark of success. And it even affects our families. We want our children to become successful, professionals maybe. No one tries to persuade their children to become servants. What? A servant? But sometimes God's ways confuse earthly wisdom. Here in Mark chapter 10, Jesus tells his disciples for the third time about his impending death. We are going up to Jerusalem, he says, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later he will rise. Jesus may as well have been speaking a foreign language to his disciples. They just didn't get it. Even two of his closest disciples, James and John. Jesus here predicts his death, and they don't seem to be at all concerned about the suffering he's about to endure. Instead, they're looking over their own selfish interests. First of all, they approach him privately. Now, there's a warning there, isn't it? If they were approaching him about something high and noble, they would do so in front of the other disciples. But no, this is a different kind of request. Teacher, they said, we want you to do whatever we ask. That's another red flag, hey? Can you imagine your kids coming up to you and saying, Mom, Dad, sit down. We want you to answer, to give us whatever we ask for. Well, brace yourself, because that's going to be a doozy. And that was really kind of Jesus' reaction too. He says, what do you want for me to do for you? Well, let one of us sit at your right hand, and let the other one sit at your left in your glory. That's it. After hearing Jesus' teachings, after seeing his compassion for the lowest and the least, they're still on a power trip. They want the highest places of power and honor and authority in Jesus' messianic kingdom, which they anticipate he's about to establish. Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. These are positions of power. And obviously, it's something they had talked about at some length at home, because in Matthew chapter 20, their mother comes to Jesus and makes the same request for her two sons. It's not unusual for someone to try to use family connections to get ahead. And apparently James and John wanted to get ahead. They're not simply asking Jesus to be chummy with him, to sit close to him. They're not asking for a relationship. They're asking for power. They want to be at the top of the pecking order. And I like the way that King James says it. The NIV says, you don't know what you're asking. King James says, you know not what you ask. Can you drink the cup that I drink? Can you be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized? Jesus wanted them to understand that in his kingdom, positions of power did not come like it came in other places. It costs to have a place at this table. To ask such a question is to request a share in his sufferings, since one's a requisite for the other. Paul makes the same point in Romans chapter 8. He says, now if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs with God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share his suffering, in order that we may also share in his glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus says. There's an old gospel song. We probably won't sing it here either. But It's an old song. It says, "Are ye able to be crucified with me? Yea, the sturdy dreamers answered, to the death we follow thee." James and John were among those sturdy dreamers. Because then Jesus says, you will drink the cup. You will be baptized with the same baptism. But for you to sit at my right and my left hand, that's not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. These positions in the kingdom were not his to give. We might think of the last 2,000 years of certain people, saints, who maybe could qualify to be at the right and the left hand of Jesus. I imagine God has many worthy servants through the ages, most of whom we've never heard of, unknown to us, or even unimagined by us. Who knows? But Jesus says that these places of honor are reserved for those who serve him. And the word then to us, I think, is that never think twice that your service to Christ is in vain, for you will have a place at the banquet table. Now, the next thing that happens is interesting. The plot kind of thickens. The other 10 disciples learn of this request and they become furious. Now, perhaps they thought that James and John didn't have the right to ask for special consideration over them. Or maybe it's because they had the same selfish ambitions themselves. I don't know. I wonder if the reaction of the disciples was one motivated either by the injustice of the request or their own jealousy. But whatever it was, Jesus calls them all together and begins to re-emphasize the meaning of real greatness in his kingdom. He contrasts greatness in this world, positions of power, elegant houses, and expensive cars and fat bank accounts, with what greatness looks like in his kingdom. Instead, Jesus says, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. The word is even slave. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. I shouldn't have to tell you, that's at the very core of the teachings of Jesus. His incarnation, his coming in human flesh, was the most powerful demonstration of this on earth. His death, which he had just predicted, was a demonstration of this truth. As he said, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. He lived that out. His washing the disciples' feet at the Last Supper was an indication of this truth. Think of that. The matchless God of all of the universe stoops down to become a human and then becomes a washer of people's feet. But see, for Jesus, that's the zenith of greatness. Jesus himself is a supreme example of what he is calling us to be. In humble, lowly form, he came into the world. And it wasn't so he could be elevated. It wasn't so he could triumph over the Roman world. He came to suffer and to die for us. And he didn't have to do it, but he did it anyway. He demonstrated greatness in his immaculate service to humanity, to you and to me. And that's what Christ asks of us, we who want to be his followers. Christ is looking for people who want to follow him and be his example. Christ is looking for people who only desire to serve him. And of course, that means that serving Christ means that we serve others whom Christ loves. A servant's job is to do all they can to make life better for others, to let them, free them to be all that they can be. A servant's interest is not first in himself or herself, but in others. Now, sadly, but obviously, most people have no interest in servanthood. And one way to avoid feeling guilty over our failures is to criticize those who do. Mother Teresa was criticized. She was often criticized about what people thought might be the long-term effects of her humanitarian ministry to the poor and the dying. For example, she was asked once, Why give people fish to eat? Instead, teach them how to fish. Her response was quick. She said, but my people can't even stand up. They're sick, they're crippled, they're demented. When I have given them fish to eat, and they can stand, I'll turn them over to you, and you can give them a rod to catch fish. But she was also quick to say that she gave more than just fish. She gave them love and joy. She gave them meaning and grace. She wanted them all to feel worthy and loved. She wanted them all to hear the call to become closer to God. There are all kinds of ways that we can serve God's people. And it includes simple acts of kindness. But of course, sometimes much more is required. Even acts of courage. No act of service to Christ and no act of love to those whom Christ loves will ever be forgotten by God. I'm going to repeat that. No act of service to Christ and no act of love to those whom Christ loves will be forgotten by God. It will last forever in the chronicles of heaven. Jesus asked James and John, can you drink the cup I drink, or can you be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? Later he says, you will drink the cup, and you will be baptized. But to sit at my right or my left is not mine to grant. And Jesus' prophecy at that point would come true. Tradition tells us that James was the first of all the disciples to become martyred, and that John was the last to die of the disciples after years of persecution, suffering, and imprisonment. I guess they didn't know what they were asking for. But you know what? They didn't turn their backs either. And we can thank God they didn't, because they played a critical role for the continuing and for the beginning and the continuation of Christ's work. Their service was not in vain, and they had a place at the great banquet. And whether it's at the right or the left hand of Jesus, we don't know, but they've got a place. And if we seek Christ's greatness as well through service to him and to those he loves, then we will have a place as well. Today is communion. It's actually a worldwide communion, where we celebrate not only communing with Christ, but communing with others who are Christ followers. And as we take of the bread and of the wine, it is a foretaste of that great banquet that's promised us as we dedicate our lives to follow Jesus in all